Well, welcome everybody to the third half of our program today. We're going to have an amazing group of women who are the current and future conservation leaders of the Coachella Valley as part of a panel. Just real briefly, I'm that crazy person you may have seen on the sand dunes in one of those little clips, Cameron Barrows with the UC Riverside's Center for Conservation Biology and UC Riverside's Palm Desert Center. So I'm going to introduce those amazing conservation leaders and let them, if they'd like, to talk a little bit more about who they represent and a little bit more about themselves. The first one is Alex Ocañas. She's a conservation social scientist with the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens.
Hi. I'm just coming online. I just caught the end of what you said, but it sounds like you're introducing me.
I am. Do you want to say anything more about yourself?
Yeah, sorry, my time was lagging just a bit. Yeah, my name is Alex. I work as a social scientist, a conservation social scientist at the Living Desert. So what does that mean? It can be a lot of things, but in short, in any environmental conservation challenge, there are going to be human aspects involved, things like politics, economics, just human behavior in general. In fact, when we look at it, at least 98% of the environmental challenges that we are trying to solve at this point are stemming from human decisions or human behaviors. So, for example, one project that we work on where the biologists and ecologists come in is to say, hey, there's a problem with the desert tortoise. Ravens are consuming them at unprecedented, unnatural rates. On our side, on the social science side, we then look at the human behaviors that lead to that challenge and how we can work with people to change those circumstances to benefit the ecosystem and people at that same time.
Fantastic. The next person I'd like to introduce is Cindy Hernandez Oriana. She's the land acquisition coordinator for a local nonprofit called the Friends of the Desert Mountains. Cindy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy, as Dr. Barrows mentioned, and acquisition coordinator. What that means is that I represent the Friends of the Desert Mountains in acquiring and selling, the acquisition of different important lands that protect vital habitat here in the Coachella Valley. That includes our local conservation areas, national monuments, and as well as the wilderness areas.
Fantastic. The third panelist is Tracy Merrigan. She's the president of the Desert Horticultural Society of the Coachella Valley. Tracy.
Hi, everybody. As Cameron said, I am a longtime horticulturalist with I always say I started gardening when I was 7 years old. So on the East Coast, so I have lots of experience in lots of different environments with plants, but I have found such a love for our desert environment here, moved out here full time, and specialize in our native plants and desert adapted plants. I'm also a master gardener and a California naturalist. So I bring all of those worlds with me today. So.
Excellent. So we have 6 questions prepared, and we're going to go through those questions. For those of you who are listening online, if you do have additional questions that you'd like to post, you can put it in the chat room, and if we have time at the end, we will definitely try to get to those. First question is going to be putting all of our panelists on the spot. As you might remember, Tamara said she didn't feel like she could pick what her favorite film was, but I'm going to ask you all what your favorite film was and how it aligns with your work and passion and why. So, Cindy, why don't you start it off?
Sure, thank you. These are all really great films, but I believe that my favorite one is Love, Trails, and Dinosaurs. It highlights some of the members of our community that we don't necessarily always think about when we're talking about the outdoors. And you know, we're all unique and different, and we all deserve the same opportunity of enjoying nature, regardless of what we look like and our abilities. And that's something that we try to do here at Friends by maintaining and creating trails in areas that don't necessarily always have that easy access to trails. In addition to providing access for people that are in wheelchairs or walkers by maintaining and improving the Ed Hasty Trail in Palm Desert.
Perfect. Alex, how about you? Did you hear me, Alex? There you are.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm glad. So I'm going to take one quick second to let you guys know that I'm having a bit of technical difficulties. I keep popping out of the chat. So if there's any time where I don't respond, I'm sorry. I just haven't heard you, and I'll come back in when technology allows me to. My favorite film, I won't say it relates maybe only directly to my passions and my interests, but also just those of the Living Desert and the work that we do. And that film for me and for us is actually the one that you saw Dr. James introduce earlier. So I think it was something like the Nigerians fight to protect the most trafficked mammal in the world. So this is really important to the Living Desert. We do a lot of work to combat trafficking. And also we help people realize, and this is something I think our audience hopefully can realize too, that this is not just a problem that's happening on the other side of the world in countries in Africa and Asia, that we, the United States, and especially
She froze. Well, while she's unfreezing, maybe we'll go on and have Tracy answer the question.
It's hard to pick because we picked all these amazing films that spoke to how one person can make a difference in their environment with environmental stewardship. But I guess I would say Insect Guardian, Fighting Fire with Fire, and A Bird in Hand. And insect guarding is such an amazing idea. Even if you have just a plot of land and how you can turn it over to nature, such an unselfish, beautiful garden that this gentleman created. And it just shows how one person can really make a difference in their neighborhood in bringing pollinators into their yard, native wildlife, and native plants. And that's what desert horticultural, that's what our mission is, and that's what we concentrate on with our community outreach. So I think that one really speaks to our organization.
Good. So are you back, Alex?
I am back for now. So let me add really quickly while I'm here. Hopefully I don't drop out. I don't know how far I got, but I think I just want to emphasize that film about trafficking, it kind of highlights what's going on in Nigeria and the demand coming from China. But I want to emphasize that it's not just located in those areas, that we too in the United States are huge contributors, one of the top contributors to the demand for illegally trafficked wildlife and parts. And California especially is a hub for that. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to change how we operate on this side as well. And that's something that the Living Desert helps to do. We're part of the Wildlife Trafficking Alliance, and we're helping just to improve that system so we can better intervene, communicate with each other, and handle the wildlife once they are confiscated, or deal with the parts if they're just parts. And message to people about what they can do and why this is really a problem that we should be engaged in solving as well.
Right. Thank you very much. So we all worked very hard to excellent list of films for you all to listen or watch and listen to today. But we're always frustrated every single year because there's nothing that really applies to the Southern California deserts that we can really relate to and here in the Coachella Valley. So I'm going to ask each of you, if a filmmaker showed up and said, would you be willing to do anything or any kind of movie or film that you would suggest? I'd like to know which what topics you think are the ones that really need to be highlighted for the Coachella Valley that maybe the rest of the world hasn't heard about yet. So if we can, let's start with Alex while she's not frozen there.
I think things are getting better, so I won't talk as quickly now to get my answer in. So I'm not from the Coachella Valley. I moved here within the last year, so I have a bit of the outsider's perspective, perhaps. Something that was really striking to me when I
Cindy, why don't you answer the question?
Sure.
What?
Thank you. I would choose to highlight the diverse life zones found here in the Coachella Valley, and I would just because I work in there and in the acquisition part of organization, I would really like to highlight in the wilderness areas that we have. Sometimes people drive through on the I-10 and they might see just a dry desert and they might not think that it actually provides vital habitat areas or could sustain different life forms. But that's really, really far from the truth for the Coachella Valley. The truth is that we live in a biological hotspot, which provides vital habitat areas for several endemic and endangered species found here in the Coachella Valley. One good example would be the Mecca aster that, not only is the Coachella Valley the home to the Mecca aster, but it's only found in the Mecca Hills wilderness. We're very fortunate to live in such a unique area that features 22 conservation areas, 4 wilderness areas, and 2 different national monuments. And, that's not to include also the 2 scenic rivers here in the Coachella Valley. So again, I would just like to bring some highlight as to how diverse the Coachella Valley really is.
Important message. I'm glad you brought that up. Tracy, how about you?
Can you hear me?
I can.
I think I would want to highlight close we are to the wildlands living here. I think it's something that, having lived in lots of other places in the United States, you don't realize how close you are to nature as you do here, with the amount of birds and lizards and other native wildlife that visit you at home in your yards, and the amazing amount of native plants that we have access to here. So I think the interface between our domestic living and the wildlands, it's so close here. It's really very unique and very special.
Yes, it is. You're right. Alex, I know you didn't get a chance to finish there. Again.
Yeah, thanks for your patience, you 3 and audience. How far did I get?
Well, you had introduced that you were new to the Coachella Valley, and that's about as far as you got.
Okay, not far. So what I was going to say is just that something that stood out to me is water here in the desert where we get less than 4 inches of rain. How can we possibly manage that water? So I think there's 3 interesting things to me. One, in the last 10 years, our groundwater levels have actually increased. They've been replenished. So I think, one, that's a success story on behalf of our water management in the area that we need to celebrate and tell and share that message. How did we do that? Secondly, I think to talk about climate change, there is a water crisis coming for us around this corner. So although we've had recent success, there's a lot more that we still.
And we lost her again. Bill, I think the water is an extremely important issue, and I think Alex is spot on in terms of her pointing that out. To manage water in such an arid environment is just a real challenge.
Oh, I'm back on. So really quickly, I want to mention the Salton Sea. So this is really interesting to me as well. So the Salton Sea is essentially a man-made lake, but it's in the East Valley. Even though it's man-made, it has become a super important part for wildlife habitat and especially birds. So it's very well used. But the water levels in that Sea Lake are decreasing significantly. And what's happening in that process is that we're losing wildlife habitat, but also there are toxic chemicals that have washed off from agricultural fields nearby. And that as the lake dries up, the toxic dust is coming into the air and is infecting and sickening nearby communities. And so I think this is something that as neighbors of that area that we absolutely need to be tuned into. We need to support the grassroots organizations working to solve that problem. And we absolutely cannot let those people go as a sacrifice zone. And of course for the wildlife too, but that's a huge issue. I think that story needs to be told more. Bye.
You're right. And you're right that the Salton Sea is a body of water that's been maintained and created by humans. But it does represent a lake that is historical in the sense that only 400 or 500 years ago, it was completely filled all the way up to almost twice its current size. And it did so naturally. And it's only since we put so many dams on the Colorado River that process of filling and drying and filling and drying has been stopped. And now we have an environmental crisis that we're dealing with there. So I think a couple of the films address this, but I really wanted to talk to you all about kids and how important it is for kids to experience nature and to get out in nature and start sort of exploring their inner scientist and asking questions and being in and with nature. And so I want you to, each of you, talk about how your organizations are trying to enhance the experience that local children might have. So Cindy, why don't you start it out?
Sure. Here at Friends of the Desert Mountains, we're aware and understand that easy access to the outdoors might not be the situation for everyone. And that is why our educational program is committed to bringing the outdoors to kids in several of the local schools. We bring out educational programs for the age that are relevant to their age and easy to understand, as well as providing access to the outdoors of several local schools. And while our education program has significantly improved the access for children in the east portion of the Coachella Valley, there's still plenty to do as an organization. And I think one of the things that we need to further do is identify
which we partner with our sponsor Vintage Nurseries on, and we provide a number of scholarships for College of the Desert students studying horticulture and turf management. And then we have another scholarship program which takes those students into their 4-year degree in a California institution. So we have one scholarship student at Cal Poly Pomona and one at Cal State Chico at the moment. And we're so excited because that's a more targeted scholarship program for students going on to study horticulture or environmental sciences or wildlife management, land management. So that's how we're sowing our seeds with young kids and with older kids.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to try you again, Alex. And we know that the Living Desert has a lot of programs for kids, but why don't you talk about it?
Right. So maybe if I don't make it, one of you guys that are familiar can fill in a bit for me. So yes, I work at a zoo, and of course, kids love the zoo. What I think we all recognize is that not every child has the opportunity to go out into nature, and they are less likely probably to have the opportunity to see wildlife up close and interact with them. So right off the bat, just to get your kid in a place, or a kid, where they can interact directly and experience that sense of fascination is one thing. And that's huge to instill in young people, just an awe of nature and appreciation for it, a sense of wonder. And then secondly, at the Living Desert, essentially every corner there is a learning opportunity where we really emphasize not only cool facts about this animal, but more importantly, what can you do as a resident of this area or as a person in general to help protect the species, to help us live in a more sustainable way, etc. So it's definitely a place of learning. There are, of course, they're on hold right now, but there are a ton of programs that we have too for youth. So I mean, things from school field trips to summer camps, opportunities for teenagers to volunteer to help out our staff all over the place. So it's in our mission, education, and I think we really do a great job with that. And I also want to just add quickly that you're not able to get to the zoo or you're not able to get to one of these wonderful programs, just getting out in nature, bringing your kids to a natural area in general so they can interact with it would be absolutely amazing, just so they can see flowers and bees and butterflies and maybe a mammal, a coyote, things like that. So, and we have nature trails at the Living Desert as well. So you can come and actually like get off the concrete path into the dirt and explore there as well.
Perfect. I think several of you have already touched on this subject already, but I think it deserves a little bit more energy and discussion, which is how can environmental organizations work better with environmental justice issues and people that are not otherwise feeling comfortable being in the spaces in nature, as well as incorporating traditional indigenous environmental perspectives. And I'd like you to think about not only what your organization is doing, but maybe even think larger what your organization could do. So Tracy, why don't you start out with this one?
One thing that we try to do with Desert Horticultural is always reach beyond our, to think outside of the bubble. I think we have a tendency with environmental issues to speak to like-minded people so much that we always have to think beyond the community that we know and grow our community, grow outward to the community that we don't know. So we do have always in our programming, we have Native Indigenous people come speak to us about their use of plants and how, to get a much different perspective on medicinal uses, native uses of native plants, and to also be able to acknowledge that we, perceive environmental issues in a different way. So I think that's a really big lesson to think about, is to step back from how we think about environmental issues and embrace and discover how other cultures, other people in our desert community think about these issues themselves. So we do that outreach in our community garden day and speakers that we have, and also volunteer projects with Agua Caliente and working at the Morongo Reservation when they have community outreach events. And when you get outside of your community, you really do get a different perspective on how people view environmental issues, environmental justice issues, and there's never too much you can do. So we strive to grow our diversity in our organization in age and cultural diversity, and we just always strive to do more. So the goal is never met.
Alex, it looks like you're not freezing these days, so why don't you take the next one?
Yes, we're taking a different approach here, so you'll notice I don't get big anymore. So yeah, I think so. There's two questions here, right? Engaging Indigenous voices, but then also in the environmental justice perspective, and obviously there's a lot of overlap there because Indigenous people and low income and also people of color, they've all been historically disempowered, discounted, marginalized. So I think those all, they kind of come together. And from my perspective, I think if these issues of environmental justice and inclusion are not at the forefront of what we're doing and they're not heavily emphasized, then we're not doing our job right as environmentalists. So there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot more that we need to do. The environmental field is really currently dominated by white people, for sure. So I think I have 3 ideas that are not originally mine that resonate with me though, and then also 2 examples quickly of what we're doing at the Living Desert. So the first is to be, and as a larger, powerful environmental organization, or just as one in general, to be an ally to those either grassroots organizations or other environmental justice organizations. And I think we can do that by sharing our social, political, financial capital with them, and also having kind of an open source approach to the resources that we have to share. So one example of what we do at the Living Desert currently, we are offering a free, super extensive course about how to do social science to the Wildlife Training Institute in Botswana. So this is essentially increasing their capacity to do the work that they want to do by themselves, and it's liberating them from depending on other people or having other people come in to do that work. So helping to increase capacity of marginalized people. Also, I think, as Tracy mentioned, that these people should always be involved in the conversation. We should always have environmental justice advocates at the table when we're discussing programs, plans, policies, projects, whatever it is, and consider how it's going to impact them and make sure that it impacts them in a beneficial way. And then the third thing that I want to mention, which I just mentioned because it's really easy to see. So if you're not in an environmental organization, but you know people, you can point this out. So I think not all of us do this, but some do. There's room to change. Is I think we have to stop offering unpaid internships, because this just only allows for the wealthy, typically white people, to participate. So that I think that absolutely has to be changed for sure. And I want to mention one more thing about being an open source to other organizations that we have found in the Coachella Valley. A few really great grassroots environmental justice groups, for example, Alianza is a wonderful organization. We recently approached them and kind of came with this, what can we do for you attitude? What can we provide to you? And let them come back to us with their responses. We've also done some similar work with the Torres Martinez tribe, opening to say, how can we help you with conservation in your lands, and that aligns essentially with your goals. So those are some quick thoughts on that. But this is a huge conversation. I think it's so important that we brought this up, and I hope that that we don't forget about this at this moment.
No, you're 100% right. Sandy, can you add to that?
Sure. I think Alex and Tracy did a really good job at pointing at pretty much everything that needs to be done. And to that, I would add that some of the most important decisions that every organization takes starts at the top. And, you know, what better way to make sure that everyone's included in those decisions than by having a diverse board that is truly reflective of their community. I think it's important for everyone here in the Coachella Valley to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral Cahuilla land, and that our community is not solely composed of white, affluent families or part-time residents that are only here during the winter. Whether it's at an organizational level or a personal level, I think we could all strive to do more to include and amplify voices of Black, Indigenous people of color, and the LGBTQ plus communities. Friends of the Desert Mountains does include Agua Caliente and organizations as such as COFEM, and we do collaborate with other communities as well. But again, talking about the educational, what I mentioned in the educational program, there is still room to grow. And one of those ways would be, I believe, to include a diversified board.
Yeah, good point.
We did receive a question in the chat, and this question is actually for Alex. And the question is, does the Living Desert do work in Africa? And also, there's another question asking if the Desert Conservation Symposium is happening this fall.
Yes, so we ourselves do pretty limited work in Africa on the ground, but what we do in Africa is support other organizations, conservation organizations who are working on the ground. So we support them financially for sure, several organizations, and then also we support them with capacity building or providing them with skills that they don't necessarily have yet in their own organization. So that could be processing data for them. I process a lot of data and come up with reports and conclusions and recommendations for our partner organizations. And also our director of conservation, Dr. James, has done several of these social science workshops in Africa as well in person. So we ourselves are not there very often with feet on the ground, but we continually support feet on the ground. Oh, that's the second question.
Yeah. And for those at home watching, the reason we're getting these additional questions of the chat, so we'll be adding questions as they come in. And the second question was if the Desert Conservation Symposium is happening this fall.
Yeah, so we were supposed to have a amazing desert conservation summit where we brought in desert conservation leaders from around the world and learned about what they were working on, gave them the opportunity to share with others, and also collect some prize money to continue their great work. Unfortunately, given the circumstances, we can't do that in person anymore, but we are still moving forward with that in some sort of a virtual manner so we can still bring people and stories together. And there will be more to follow about that.
So should we go on with our regular ones, or do you have another one, Debbie? Okay.
Yes, go on with the regular questions. Sorry about that.
That's fine. Talked already about how biologically rich the Coachella Valley is and the surrounding desert, and actually a biodiversity hotspot that is probably not appreciated by enough people. We also have a large and growing human population, and there is this what ecologists refer to as the wildland-urban interface, where we have homes and people's activity that are right on the edge and intersecting with the natural areas. And sometimes there's problems that the humans are presenting to the wildlands, and like planting invasive species in their yards that then invade into the natural areas. And sometimes there is at least a perception of how the wildlands might be impinging on people, like coyotes and snakes and so forth and so on. I would argue that that's more perception than real. But are your organizations addressing or talking about those wildland interfaces at all, or is this a topic that really is going on elsewhere? So we'll start with you, Alex, since you're still not frozen.
I think my issues are mostly resolved. If somebody else would like to go in front of me, I don't want to take all the time.
Okay, Tracy, go ahead then.
Thank you, though.
Well, I think one thing that we really do is concentrate on weeds, so invasive species, and trying to reach out to the community and talk to them about invasive species, and how just thinking about it a little bit at the garden center and what you put in your cart makes a gigantic difference once you get it home, and how it has quick access to go into our wildlands here. So things like fountain grass is a continual conversation, and invasive grasses in general for big box stores and for growers. Grasses have a really high markup, so they're cheap to grow and they're easy to sell, and they're just devastating in our hills. If you see so much brown grass that you see on our hills is a lot of invasive grasses that take away from our beautiful wildflowers. So if we had less invasive grasses up in our hills and everywhere else in the Coachella Valley, we'd have a bigger wildflower season. We'd have more food and forage for our desert wildlife. And they're also create a really high fire damage, fire danger. So I think we, invasive species, or we call them weeds. Weeds are a plant that is in the wrong place. It's just, I think it's critical here. And it's another one of those issues that we have to really think beyond our community. We did a presentation to the Palm Springs Sustainability Commission, Jen Prado and I from the Friends last fall. And it was so fascinating because most of the people on the commission didn't even know we had a problem with invasive species. So we think we're talking, we've been, we and a large, probably like 11 group committee in the desert, the Low Desert Weed Management Group, we've been working on this issue for years, and it is amazing how we just need to keep hitting the pavement and reaching out beyond our communities to really educate the public on these issues. So invasives are a big deal, and one that is really easy for you to help in your own home.
That's an excellent point. In some of the research that we do here at the university, we've been looking at patterns of biodiversity in the Coachella Valley, and there's a really obvious and clear decline in biodiversity when the weeds move in. All of a sudden, there's not as many lizards, there's not as much wildlife, there's certainly not as much in terms of wildflowers, and it just drops off dramatically until you get beyond those weedy areas, and then all of a sudden it picks up again. So it's a really important point. Cindy.
Here in the Coachella Valley, we're very fortunate to have something called the Coachella Valley Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or CVMHCP for short. It's the result of a collaborative effort that has shaped the extended community, and its main purpose is to protect the vital habitat areas that our local endangered and endemic species depend on. And it is a conservation challenge that the conservation challenge, would be getting the public involved in helping protect these areas. And as Tracy mentioned, weeds is a big problem. And, one of the things that we do here at Friends is the removal of invasive species, such as the removal of tamaris, fountain grass, snake-knit. We're making sure that we keep our eyes open and that we work with the community to eradicate and remove these species so that our local species have an opportunity to thrive.
Great. Alex, do you want to add anything?
I don't think I have anything to add on this one. I'm thinking I'll save some time for the last question there.
That's great. Cindy, are there any new questions coming in at this point?
Do you have any questions? That's it. Okay, so we do have a new question from the audience, and it says, how has your organization seen evidence of restoration or endangered plants, animals throughout your work?
Not sure I understand the question.
Is this the question? I'm sorry, hold on.
Yes. How's your work? Have you seen benefits from your work helping restore endangered species?
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't read the writing. How has the work of your organization improved or endangered plants and animals here in the Coachella Valley?
Great.
Or in your individual communities?
So
Alex, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. I can give at least one example. Well, as you heard earlier, we support a lot of organizations abroad that are doing great work to save a lot of species, and they are having success. But to highlight a local example, something that we are working on right now and seeing some success is related to our, I might freeze here. They put me on the big screen, so that's when I freeze. So related to desert tortoise conservation. So one of the biggest threats to desert tortoise is predation by the common raven. The population of common ravens has increased by 1,700% over the last 50 years. So that is a huge increase. They actually peck through the shells of the little baby tortoises. So one thing that we've been doing both on grounds and off grounds, is helping people to learn about how their behaviors impact wildlife and how they can adjust their behaviors to make a difference. So with the raven tortoise thing, ravens are feeding off of resources that humans provide, especially through open dumpsters. So some work that we've taken on is to engage just members of the public in general, asking them to cover their trash, but specifically we have a program that targets restaurants. We did this with 60 restaurants in Yucca Valley and 29 Palms, which are they're not necessarily in the Coachella Valley, but they're in a neighboring valley, neighbors. So we targeted these restaurants and engaged them to cover their trash in their dumpsters so they're not feeding ravens in these areas. It's a high raven, high tortoise population area. And this program has just launched, and we're still in the process of strengthening it. We've learned a lot from this first round, but even just in that first round, we saw a 13% increase in the rate of dumpster closure, which is how, I'm not going to remember off the top of my head, it's at least 40 days, somewhere between 40 and 60 days more per year with dumpsters closed. So what that means is that ravens are having less opportunity to feed on resources. They will produce less young. And if we can continue this trend and amplify it, then we will continue to reduce the raven population, thereby increasing the chances of survival of the threatened desert tortoise and other wildlife, the fringe-toed lizard, the burrowing owls, all sorts of things. So that is one of my favorite examples of some kind of direct on-the-ground impact that we're starting to see.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Cindy, how about the Friends? Do you have any examples that you could point to?
Sure. Going back to what we were talking about, the invasive species, one of our most popular events is National Public Lands Day. And every year we select a special area that requires our attention. And you'd be surprised the amount of trash and just different debris that we remove from the outdoors. And one of the other programs that Dr. Burrows is very familiar with is also our citizen science program that helps that is done in collaboration with UCR Palm Desert to collect very important data about climate change and how climate change is affecting our local species.
Great. Thank you for highlighting that particular project. Tracy, do you have anything you can add?
Alex, I think that dumpster program sounds amazing. So I'm so glad you guys are doing that. That is just absolutely fantastic. I think the biggest thing that we can do is public outreach and education. So be on the ground, talking to people, promoting not planting invasive species, promoting native plants, and talking to people on how their one little slice of their oasis here in the desert can help our native wildlife and help preserve our water system. So your yard can be a little way station for lizards and other wildlife in your neighborhood, since we are so close to the wildlands. And so I think that's where we can add the most support and support other organizations in the valley.
Thanks. So I think this last question that I have is one that you've probably already touched on, and so I would say I'm just going to give you the opportunity. Is there one additional thing that you would suggest community members or individuals can do to help protect our native and natural habitats here in the Coachella Valley? Is there anything above and beyond what you've already highlighted that your organizations are doing? So, Cindy, why don't you start out?
Sure. I would say get involved. Just if you're watching, if you're listening, get involved. Find your local environmental organization working in your communities. And for those of you that lived here in the Coachella Valley, go to www.desertmountains.org for more information on how to get involved and participate in our programs and volunteer opportunities. And there's everyday little things that we could also do, from making sure that not only do we recycle, but we also reduce the use of plastic and other non-renewable sources at home. When you're out camping, make sure you fully extinguish campfires and pack in and pack out your trash when hiking or camping. But I think most importantly, one of the ways that you could actually help your local environment is by making informed decisions. And by making informed decisions, I mean making sure that your voice is heard by voting for politicians that also believe that protecting nature and increasing the outdoors is important to them as it is important to you.
Excellent. Alex, do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. For one, I totally agree with Cindy about supporting organizations, getting involved, and voting. I think those are huge things that you can do to help. I think I want to add too, really quickly, if you're like an at-home conservationist and you want to do something simple at home, I would just say plant native plants to support native wildlife and reduce your water consumption. If you're feeling a bit more ambitious and really want to get out there and maybe take on something new, I think what I would suggest is to mobilize with this Black Lives Matter movement that we're seeing right now. I think we have to realize that ultimately we're really fighting a similar force here, the Black Lives Matter and environmentalists in general. I think we're fighting against systems that value profit over people, that value profit over the environment, systems where the people profiting the most are not those who are suffering the most, systems where there's such an obsession with short-term profit that has to be complete ignorance for the long-term loss. These are things that we're all fighting together. So to come together, I think to dismantle those systems of environmental racism and racism in general will help the fight for environmentalism as well. And I think also we have to realize that as long as we're divided people, that we can't come together and we can't ask our leaders to be better and we can't demand for change as we could as strongly as one people. So I think uniting with that force and trying to find the areas where we can overlap and support those in what maybe seem like two movements, but it's really, I think, one and the same.
Excellent. Tracy, you get the last word here.
Well, I would love to have people think, if you're going to think at home in your the small environment that you can make a difference beyond going out and being involved, is to use sustainable practices when you are gardening and when you're in your house. So what things that you can do are to check your sprinkler systems to make sure you don't have any leaks. We have lots of issues with our little sprinklers getting plugged up here in the desert, so check those weekly. Please don't use pesticides, and you don't have to use pesticides. If you put sustainable practices into your gardening, you'll have an amazing garden here in the desert. Use native plants wherever you can. And they help protect our native wildlife and our pollinators and conserve water. And then go talk to your neighbors and speak to your neighbors and convert other people to these thoughts. As we grow, as people become more involved with sustainability and using sustainable practices, the impact that we can make just becomes greater and greater. So think of stewardship for yourself and for future generations to come.
Cindy, did any questions come in at the last minute?
Sure, let me just double check. Nope, I think that was all of the questions that we have from the audience.
Okay, well, I want to thank all three of you. You did a fabulous job of explaining the issues and explaining how your organizations are getting involved and how you personally are passionate about our environmental issues and solutions. So thank all three of you. You did a fabulous job, even with a little bit of glitches here and there. We got through those and we did well. I want to move on just a little bit. As hopefully you all know, that there are really two parts of this film festival. There is the one that we just watched today, and then there is an on-demand portion that has a feature-length film called The Human Element, along with an assortment of short films that are focused on individuals who have catalyzed change. And we asked people who have seen that already. Now you still have an opportunity to watch it for the next couple of days, but it started a couple of days ago, and we asked people to sort of pick the one they liked the best. And randomly, we picked 8 people as a raffle, and those 8 people are going to receive some prizes, and that will happen probably by Monday or Tuesday. So just to let you know, but I wanted to let you know who they are. We have Harvey Abram, Jim Morgan, Kevin Kigma, Yolanda Galvan, Aline Robinson, Carrie Goricki, Teresa Coughlin, and Hillary Roberts. And I wanted to highlight some of their comments for you, just to maybe, if you haven't seen the films, to get you to go back and look at these, because again, you have a couple more days to view this. The first one I'm going to mention is Kevin Kigman, who thought he was mesmerized by the feature film, The Human Element. And the photos and filming were spectacular, beautifully woven together by the photographer's personal story. Our environmental problems were presented from the unique framework of basic elements, with human beings as impactful as any of the other 4 elements. And it brought to light the root cause of environmental harm. It is us, but we can change, and nature can heal itself if we do. The film also treated coal mining with compassion rarely seen in other environmental films. That compassion, together with facts and action, are what we need to make changes and we need to save the planet and its amazing life. Wonderful music, and one of the best environmental films he's ever seen. Another one that I wanted to mention was Carrie Growicki, and she finished just watching the film, the on-demand portion of the film festival, and she comments that it was extremely well curated. But her favorite was one called Flipping the Switch. You might remember that one is about Flint, Michigan, and the lead in the water there. And that was her favorite. The element that resonated with her was was the power one person can wield to bring about action and change. Leanne Walters is like a proverbial butterfly who flutters its wings, eventually causing a hurricane. She knew something was amiss with the water in her house. She found that there are other issues in the neighborhood in her city, and then she's on to Capitol Hill, testifying in front of Congress to encourage the passage of federal regulations for safe drinking water. It's the power of one, and she was emphatic about that. And the last one I want to mention is Teresa Coughlin, and her favorite was a movie called This Land. And she said, why? Because it inspired and it highlighted the importance of fostering a strong conservation ethic within a diverse conservation culture. Picture of public lands and earth depends on it. So thank you for these 8 people who now are going to get a prize. And I've seen some of the prizes, and you are really lucky. If you don't want them, I'll take them. And finally, I think we're going to end this third half of the program with a pledge. It's called the Intersectional Environmentalist Pledge. And this was one that was produced by a woman by the name of Leah Thomas. She goes by Green Girl Leah. And I'm going to read that to you. And it's a pledge that I hope I don't expect you need to physically sign something, but that you emotionally sign on to this, because I think it covers a lot of the issues that our 3 panelists discussed in detail here. And I think Alex made the point that these issues are not just environmental issues, they are woven together with the environmental movement, and they are in fact one. And so what Leah wrote here, and again, this is something that I think is very heartfelt and something that we should consider, is that, so I'm going to read it from her perspective. I will stand in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and the planet. I will not ignore the intersections of environmentalism and social justice. I will use my privilege to advocate for Black and brown lives in spaces where the message is often silent. I will proactively do the work to learn about environmental and social injustice that Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities face without minimizing. I will respect the boundaries of Black, Indigenous, and people of color friends, and activists, and will not demand that they perform emotional labor or do the work for me. I will share my learnings with other environmentalists and my community. I will amplify the messages of Black, Indigenous, and people of color activists and environmental leaders, and I will not remain silent during pivotal political and cultural movements that impact the Black, Indigenous, people of color community. So I think that's a great way to finish this off. Thank you all who stayed on the line and listened to us. I really appreciate it. And let us know what you think and how we can do this in the future. Hopefully next time we'll do it in person, which will be way easier, and Alex won't be freezing during that.
Hopefully not, unless we have another problem.
So I think that's all that I have here. And so again, thank you all. Thanks for our panel, and go out, get outside, and make a difference.
Thank you, everybody. This was wonderful.